Patpatapatas mapatashso. He was invisible the moment he walked in. Worn jacket, tool bag. The kind of man people look through rather than at. But when three armed men kicked open the door of a downtown Seattle jewelry store and started screaming at everyone to get on the floor, Cole Donovan did not flinch. He did not run. He did not pray. He simply counted. Exits, weapons, angles. The way a man does when his body still remembers what his life tried to forget. Nobody in that room knew what he used to be. That was the only thing keeping them alive. If this story grips you from the very first second, drop your city in the comments right now, hit the like button, and stay until the very end. Let's see just how far this story can travel. The jewelry store on Fifth Avenue in downtown Seattle was the kind of place that made people feel slightly underdressed just by walking past it. Floor-to-ceiling glass, brass fixtures polished to a mirror shine, display cases lit from underneath so that even a modest diamond caught light like something supernatural. The store was called Hargrove & Associates, which sounded more like a law firm than a jeweler, and maybe that was intentional. The name carried a quiet authority that said, "We don't need to try." It was a Tuesday in October, the sky outside the color of old pewter, the streets still damp from overnight rain. Seattle mornings in fall had a particular smell: wet concrete, espresso from the cart on the corner, diesel from the buses groaning up the hill. The city moved at its usual pace, purposeful, slightly irritable, everyone somewhere to be. Cole Donovan parallel parked his work van on 5th at 8:47 in the morning, which was 3 minutes later than he'd planned. He sat for a moment with the engine ticking down, checking the service ticket clipped to his visor. Hargrove & Associates. Annual inspection and firmware update, alarm panel and motion sensor array. Contact. Mr. Hargrove himself. Cole had done this store twice before. He knew the layout. He knew the old panel in the back office still ran on legacy software that the manufacturer had discontinued 2 years ago, and he knew the store's owner, Gerald Hargrove, would once again tell him that everything was working fine and ask why he needed to update anything. He grabbed his tool bag from the passenger seat, zipped his jacket halfway, and got out into the cold. He was not a large man in the way people expected when they imagined military. He was 6 feet even, lean rather than broad, the kind of build that came from years of functional use rather than any vanity. His hands were the giveaway, if you knew what to look for, thick through the knuckles, with a scar that ran from the base of his left thumb to his wrist that he never explained. His face was the kind that settled naturally into stillness, not coldness, just stillness. There was a difference. He pushed through the front door of Hargrove & Associates at 8:51. The interior was warm and hushed, the way expensive places always managed to be. Soft music, something with strings, barely audible beneath the low conversation of 2 salespeople arranging a display near the window. There were 4 customers already in the store: an older woman in a wool coat examining a bracelet at the far counter, a young couple looking at engagement rings near the center display with the quiet intensity of people doing math in their heads, and a woman standing near the entrance who had just ended a phone call and was slipping her phone into the pocket of a charcoal blazer that probably cost more than Cole's monthly rent. Cole noticed her the way he noticed everything, briefly, categorically, and without particular interest. Mid-30s, dark hair pulled back, the kind of posture that came from never being the least important person in a room. She glanced at him when he came in, the way people glance at service workers, long enough to register that he wasn't a threat, short enough to make clear he wasn't a person. That was fine. He was used to it. He made his way to the rear of the store, where Gerald Hargrove was already emerging from the back office, with the resigned expression of a man who had agreed to something he didn't fully understand and was now hoping it would be brief. "Mr. Donovan?" Hargrove was 63, round-faced, silver-haired. He shook Cole's hand in the distracted way of someone whose attention was already elsewhere. "I still don't understand why we have to do this every year. Nothing has broken. The firmware controls your communication relay to the monitoring station," Cole said. "If it goes out of date, the system looks active when it isn't." "It looked active last time you said that and nothing happened." "Right, nothing happened yet." Hargrove sighed the sigh of a man who paid people to worry about things so he didn't have to. "Fine. Back office is open. The coffee machine is broken, so I can't offer you anything." "I'm okay." Cole set his tool bag down on the office desk, unzipped it, and started pulling out equipment with the methodical quiet of a man who had learned a long time ago that most jobs were just patience dressed up as skill. Victoria Sinclair had not planned to stop at Hargrove and Associates that morning. She had planned to be in her office at Sinclair Group's downtown tower by 9, with a 30-minute buffer before the 10 o'clock board presentation that she had been preparing for 3 weeks. The presentation outlined the company's proposed acquisition of a smaller regional firm, and there were 2 members of the board she did not fully trust, and she needed every one of those 30 minutes. But her assistant, Priya, had called her at 7:30 to say that the courier carrying her grandmother's repaired watch, dropped off at Hargrove 6 weeks ago, had been canceled due to a scheduling error, and if Victoria wanted it back before her grandmother's birthday dinner on Friday, she needed to pick it up herself. Victoria had said several things in response to this information that Priya had diplomatically pretended not to hear. And so here she was, standing in a jewelry store at 8:50-something in the morning, waiting for a saleswoman named Denise to locate one vintage watch in the back, when she had a board presentation at 10 and 2 people on that board who she was fairly certain were working against her. She checked her phone again. No new messages. She pulled up the presentation file and scrolled through the opening slides, reading for tone. She'd done this already, multiple times. She kept doing it anyway because standing still without something in her hands made her feel like she was wasting time. The serviceman had come in a few minutes ago. She'd clocked him the way she clocked everything, automatically, thoroughly. Tool bag, work jacket with a company patch she didn't read. He'd gone to the back without speaking to anyone except the owner, who looked mildly annoyed to see him. She went back to her slides. Denise had not returned. Victoria was considering just asking for her card to be charged and picking up the watch another day when the front door opened. 3 men came in fast, not the way customers come in, hesitating at the entrance, orienting themselves. These men came in like they already knew exactly where they were going, which was everywhere at once. They spread out before the door had closed behind them, black tactical clothing, ski masks, and weapons that Victoria's mind registered before her thoughts caught up with the sight of them. 2 shotguns and what appeared to be a compact automatic rifle carried by the man in the middle, who was larger than the other 2 and moved with the flat, controlled energy of someone who had done this before. The larger man raised the rifle and fired a single shot into the ceiling. The sound was enormous inside the stone and glass space. The older woman in the wool coat screamed. One of the salespeople, a young man near the window, dropped to the floor before anyone said anything. The young couple at the engagement ring display grabbed each other. "Down," the man with the rifle said. He didn't shout. He said it the way you'd say down to a dog that already knew better. "Everybody on the ground, hands out where I can see them. Do it now." Victoria did not move for 1 full second. Not from bravery, from a kind of short circuit between what her mind was receiving and what her body was willing to accept. Then someone near her went to the floor, and the movement broke whatever was frozen in her, and she went down too, pressing her palms flat against the cold tile. Her phone was in her blazer pocket. She thought about it. She did not reach for it. In the back office, Cole heard the shot. He did not startle. He was already reaching for the panel cable he'd been about to reconnect when the sound hit. A single, hard, concussive report, slightly muffled by walls but unmistakable. He set the cable down slowly, straightened up. Gerald Hargrove had gone pale in the doorway between the office and the service corridor. "What was—" Cole held up one hand, not urgently, just firmly. He crossed to the office door that opened onto the main floor, staying to the left of the frame, and looked through the narrow gap. He saw immediately 3 shooters, hostages on the floor. One man maintaining position near the entrance while the other 2 moved toward the display cases. Tactical formation. Not random. These men had rehearsed this. The one with the rifle was clearly the primary. He moved with a calm that the other 2 were still working to match. Cole pulled back from the door. He turned to Hargrove, who was gripping the edge of his own desk. "Get behind the filing cabinet," Cole said quietly. "Don't move, don't make a sound, and don't come out until I come get you, or you hear sirens and nothing else. We have to call—" "Someone already has," Cole said, which was probably true. In a store full of people with phones, it only took one. "Get behind the cabinet." Hargrove moved. Cole turned back to the door. He studied what he could see. The ceiling, the layout of the cases. The fire suppression heads mounted in a line above the main floor, the door to the service corridor at the far end. He already knew the floor plan from his prior visits. He knew where the panel was, which circuits it controlled, where the secondary junction box was mounted in the service hall. He knew the fire suppression system was CO2, not water. Good for electronics, bad for visibility. He began doing what he'd been trained to do a long time ago, making decisions before he needed them. Damian Cross had done 4 jobs in the past 2 years, all of them clean. He was not sloppy. He was not impulsive. He had spent 3 weeks studying Hargrove and Associates before this morning, learning the staff rotations, the camera positions, the response time of the private security firm whose contract the store held. 6 minutes, average. That was what he had. He intended to be gone in 4, but the job this morning was not about diamonds. It was about what Gerald Hargrove had been paid to store for a man named Arthur Voss. A small encrypted data drive, no larger than a pack of gum, currently sitting inside a black velvet ring box in the 3rd display case from the left, behind the row of platinum bands. Cross didn't know everything that was on it. He knew enough. He knew it was worth considerably more than anything else in the building, and he knew that the man who had hired him to retrieve it was both powerful and impatient. "Move the hostages to the center," he told Rennick, the one on his right. "Tighter. I want them where Galloway can see all of them at once." Rennick moved through the room, gesturing with the shotgun. The hostages shuffled inward. Cross watched them. The older woman who was crying quietly, the young couple holding each other, the salespeople on their knees with their hands behind their heads. And then the woman in the blazer. She was on the floor like the others, hands flat, but her eyes were moving. Not the panicked scanning of someone looking for an exit. She wasn't going anywhere. She was watching, reading the room. Cross had seen that before, in people who were used to being in control of situations. She wouldn't do anything stupid. People like her calculated too carefully for stupid. "You," he said, and pointed the rifle at her. "What's your name?" She looked at him directly. "Victoria." "You have a phone, Victoria?" "Yes." "Slide it out, slowly, and then slide it away from you." She did. He watched her do it without trembling and decided she was going to be useful as a buffer. Someone the police would negotiate for, someone visibly important. He turned back to his work. He had a display case to open and a drive to find, and he had just under 4 minutes left. Cole had counted 3 shooters and placed them spatially. The leader, who was now moving toward the display cases with a small pry tool, the one covering the hostages from the left side of the room, and the one posted near the front door. 12 hostages. 9 customers and staff visible from his angle, plus Hargrove in the office behind him. He had no weapon. He had a tool bag containing a voltage meter, a cable stripper, several lengths of coaxial wire, a flathead and 2 Phillips screwdrivers, a small flashlight, and a box cutter. He also had something else. He had the building. From his position in the service corridor, he could reach the main alarm panel, the fire suppression actuator switch, the power relay for the display case lighting, and the junction box that fed the ventilation system for the front half of the floor. He could not take 3 armed men in direct confrontation. He had no illusions about what shotguns did to people. And the man by the door had angles on most of the floor. But he didn't need to confront them. He needed to control the environment until options changed. He moved back down the service corridor, silent in his work boots, and began making his first set of decisions. He pulled the panel cover off the secondary junction box. He did not cut the power. That would trigger the emergency lighting, which was brighter and harder to work with. Instead, he found the relay that controlled the front display lighting and isolated it. He'd pull it when he needed the distraction. Not yet. He checked the fire suppression actuator, a manual pull, older system, mounted beside the electrical panel exactly where the installation schematic said it would be. CO2 dispersal, 12-second fill time for the main floor. It would blind everyone in the room, including the hostages, which meant timing mattered enormously. He spent 40 seconds he didn't feel comfortable spending just standing still, thinking. Then he went back to the door and looked through the gap again. The leader was into the 3rd display case now, moving methodically. The hostage cover man, Rennick, was pacing slightly, which wasn't good for Cole's purposes, but wasn't terrible either. Pacing meant his attention wasn't fixed. The one by the door, Galloway, the though Cole didn't know the name, hadn't moved. Cole looked at the woman in the blazer. She was still watching. Her hands were flat on the tile, her face composed in the way people compose themselves when composure is a decision rather than a feeling. She'd noticed him at the door. He could tell because her eyes had moved to the gap in the service door and then moved away without reacting, which took more discipline than most people had. He made a decision. He pushed the service door open 6 inches. Quietly. He waited. Nobody on the floor looked toward him. He caught her eye. She saw him. He held her gaze for 2 seconds, then held up 2 fingers, waited, then pointed to the man near the entrance. She blinked. A small, controlled blink that wasn't a blink. She'd understood. He didn't know how exactly, but she'd understood the way people understand things when they're paying attention hard enough. He was telling her there were 2 targets he couldn't handle from where he was. He was telling her he needed something. He eased the door closed again. He needed a little longer. He needed the leader to find what he was looking for, because the moment of retrieval, the moment of success, was when focus narrowed. When a man who'd been holding tension for 6 minutes finally got his hands on the thing he came for, there was a half-second of cognitive release that every trained operator knew to recognize. Cole was going to use that half-second. He went back to his tool bag and picked up the flashlight. He checked the battery. Then he waited, which was the hardest part, and the part he happened to be best at. Victoria's knees were starting to ache against the tile. She didn't shift her weight. Shifting weight drew attention, and attention right now was something she did not want. The man in the blazer, the technician, the one she'd written off as furniture when she walked in, had just communicated something to her through a 6-inch gap in a service door, and he'd done it without a single word, and she had somehow understood him completely. She didn't know how to explain that. She was still turning it over. He was calm. That was the first thing she'd noticed before the robbery, when he was just a man walking through the door with a tool bag. People who worked in her building had that same kind of facility for moving without friction, for occupying space without performing it. But this was different. What she'd seen in his face at the door wasn't calm as a personality type. It was calm as a trained state, something being held in place by practice. She'd met veterans. She'd worked with them, hired them, sat across conference tables from them. She recognized the quality now with the benefit of present context. She did not know what he was planning. She knew he was planning something. The man with the rifle, the one in charge, was working through a display case now with a pry tool that he seemed to have used before, and the particular case he was focused on had nothing especially remarkable about it from where Victoria was lying. Platinum bands. Some kind of anniversary collection, she thought. But he wasn't looking at the rings. He was looking for something underneath them. She filed that away. The man who'd asked her name crossed the floor in front of her, stepping over a saleswoman who flinched visibly, and he moved toward the case. He bent down. She heard a small clicking sound, something small being picked up, and she saw him straighten with something in his closed fist, and whatever it was small. And the way he held it, you'd think it was the most valuable thing in the building. Maybe it was. She looked back toward the service door. It opened. The service door opened 4 inches, and Cole came through it sideways, moving along the rear wall with his back flat against the paneling and his tool bag left behind in the corridor. He had the flashlight in his left hand and the box cutter in his right, blade retracted. He wasn't going to use the box cutter unless everything else failed. He just wanted the weight of it. He stopped at the corner where the rear wall met the side wall, crouching behind the end cap of the last display case. A tall, freestanding unit that put 3 feet of tempered glass and steel framing between him and the man covering the hostages from the left side of the room. From this position, he could see almost the entire floor. Damian Cross was still near the center cases, now standing upright with something closed in his fist, his rifle hanging on a single-point sling across his chest. Rennick had drifted a few steps closer to the hostages, which was a problem for the angle Cole needed. Galloway hadn't moved from near the entrance. Victoria was on the floor approximately 12 feet from Cole's position. She was watching the service door. When she saw him, she moved her eyes back to the center of the room without changing anything else about her face or her body, and Cole thought, she's done this before. Not combat, clearly, But she had done something that required the ability to receive information without broadcasting it. Cross held up the small object in his hand. Cole could see it now, a data drive in a ring box, the velvet lid flipped open. He examined it with the focused attention of a man confirming something he'd waited on. "Got it," Cross said. Rennick stopped pacing. Galloway shifted weight near the door. That was the moment. Cole knew it with the same certainty he'd known a dozen moments like it over the years. The exhale moment, when a team's collective tension released a fraction because the primary objective was secured. Attention narrowed to the drive and away from everything peripheral. Cole stood up from behind the display case. "Hey," he said. 3 heads turned. He was already moving. He threw the flashlight, not at anyone, but at the fire suppression panel on the wall, the red actuator pull he'd identified from across the room. It hit the housing, but not the pull itself, which hadn't been what he was aiming for. He was aiming to create a moment of visual tracking, and all 3 men's eyes followed the flashlight. He was already at the junction panel beside the rear door, pulling the relay switch he'd isolated earlier. The front display lighting died, taking out a quarter of the room's illumination in a single instant. Not darkness, but a sudden reduction that shifted everyone's visual field. It wasn't much. It didn't need to be much. "Don't move!" Rennick swung the shotgun up. Cole dropped below the display case again. A shot went into the ceiling. Second ceiling shot this morning, which meant Rennick's trigger discipline was poor. That was useful information. "Somebody's in the back!" Galloway called from the door. Cross had not fired. Cross was standing in the same position, turning slowly, scanning. That was the more dangerous response. He was resetting, not reacting. "Find him," Cross said. Cole was moving along the back wall, staying below the line of the display cases. He had approximately 15 seconds before Rennick reached his last position. He used 10 of them to get to the far end of the rear wall, and 3 more to confirm that the service corridor door was still 4 steps away. He did not go through it. Going through it put him back in a dead-end hallway, and dead-end hallways were only useful if you were planning to make the people chasing you come through a single-file choke point, which he wasn't ready for yet. He stopped, pressed his back against the wall, listened. Rennick was moving along the cases, sweeping the shotgun low. Cole could hear his breathing, fast, not controlled. Not a professional. A man doing professional work, but not a professional himself. Cross from the center of the floor. "Rennick, slow down. I got him cornered. You got a position. You don't got him." There was a pause. Rennick's footsteps slowed. Cole looked up at the ceiling. The fire suppression actuator pull was 12 feet to his left, closer now than when he'd thrown the flashlight at its housing. He could reach it. The question was whether he could reach it before Rennick rounded the end of the last display case and had a direct line to him. He measured the distance and the timing in the way he'd been taught to, which was fast and imprecise and therefore honest about its own limits. He went for it. He came up from the crouch running, hit the actuator pull with his right hand, and felt the mechanism release. The CO2 system triggered with a deep mechanical thud, and then the main floor filled. Not slowly. CO2 from a ceiling suppression system filled a room the way a held breath releases, all at once, with a sound like a continuous exhale from something enormous. The white discharge cloud expanded laterally across the ceiling and dropped, and within 8 seconds the visibility in the front half of the store dropped to roughly 4 feet. Victoria heard the shot at the ceiling first, then the thud of the system triggering, and then a sound she couldn't immediately categorize. A massive exhalation building in volume. She had time to understand what it was. Half a second before the cloud reached her, and she turned her face away and pulled the collar of her blazer up over her nose, which was insufficient but better than nothing. The room went white and loud and cold. Around her she could hear the other hostages reacting, coughing, someone crying, the young woman from the couple calling her partner's name. CO2 wasn't toxic in a quick discharge like this. Not lethally, but it displaced oxygen and the cold made it feel worse than it was. People's bodies didn't know the difference between "it won't kill you" and "it feels like it will." "Stay down," she said to the room, loud enough to be heard. She didn't know if it was the right thing. She said it anyway. From somewhere in the white, Cross's voice. "Rennick! Galloway! Hold positions!" And then closer. A grunt. A scuffle. Something falling into a display case. The crack of glass. Victoria kept her face down and listened. What she heard over the next 90 seconds was not what she expected violence to sound like. She expected it to be loud. It wasn't, mostly. It was a series of short, percussive events separated by near silence. A collision, a sharp exhale, something heavy hitting the floor. The kind of sounds a room made when someone who knew what they were doing moved through it with a specific purpose and very little wasted motion. The cloud began to thin near the floor, slowly. She raised her head. She saw the man, Cole. She thought of him now, though she didn't know his name yet. Standing over Rennick's prone form near the end of the display case run. He had the shotgun. He held it with the ease of someone who'd held weapons before, stock against his shoulder, muzzle down, not pointing it at anyone currently. He was scanning. Cross was not in her field of vision. Galloway was near the door, coughing, the rifle raised, but without a target. "Set it down," Cole said to Galloway. Not loudly. The voice carried through the thinning cloud the way voices carried in empty buildings. Without effort, somehow everywhere. Galloway hesitated. "Your partner isn't getting up. Your other partner is out of the room." She saw something shift in Galloway's posture. "It's just you, and you're pointing a rifle at a room full of civilians with nowhere to go. Set it down." There was a long 4 seconds. Galloway lowered the rifle to the floor. He stepped back from it with his hands raised, and he sat down against the wall beside the entrance, and did not move again. And the expression on his face was the expression of a man who had abruptly run the arithmetic and found it didn't work. The CO2 continued to thin. People were coughing, shifting, starting to get up. Cole moved back through the room, and Cole checked Rennick quickly. Unconscious, breathing, hand secured with a length of coaxial wire Cole had been carrying in his jacket pocket. And then he moved toward the service door. He paused. He looked back at Victoria, who was standing now, picking her phone up from the floor where she'd slid it earlier. She was looking at him. He said, "Cross got out. He has the drive." She stared at him. "How do you know his name?" "I was listening for about 4 minutes before I moved." He glanced at the entrance, where the cloud was still a white smear along the ceiling. "Police are going to be here in under 2 minutes. When they come in, tell them there were 3. 2 are accounted for. 1 went out the back during the suppression discharge. Tell them he has a data drive from the 3rd display case." "Who are you?" she said. "I'm the technician," he said. "I'm going to go find my tool bag." He went through the service door. Victoria stood in the middle of the jewelry store, phone in hand, the air still cold and white around the edges, and tried to organize what had just happened into something that made consecutive sense. She couldn't quite do it. Things had occurred in too rapid a sequence and with too much competence from a man who had come in to update firmware. She called 911. The dispatcher told her units were already en route. She relayed what Cole had said about the 3 men, the drive, the one who'd gone out the back. She did it accurately because she had, despite everything, been paying attention. Behind her, the older woman in the wool coat was helping one of the salespeople to her feet. The young couple near the engagement rings were holding each other and not speaking. A saleswoman named Denise appeared from somewhere in the back, looking like she'd spent the last 10 minutes in a supply closet, which she had. The police came through the door 40 seconds later. 4 officers, weapons drawn, ordering everyone down again, which caused a second round of distress among people who'd already been on the floor once this morning and didn't particularly want to repeat. Victoria identified herself, showed her ID, and began telling them what she knew. She was clear and sequential and didn't editorialize, which the lead officer seemed to appreciate because he stopped interrupting her after the first 30 seconds. Cole emerged from the back hallway with his tool bag over his shoulder. 2 officers immediately pointed weapons at him, which he handled by setting the bag down slowly and raising his hands and saying nothing at all, which was somehow more convincing than anything he could have said. Victoria said, "He's with me," which wasn't accurate, but it was efficient. The officers lowered their weapons by degrees. Cole was directed to a bench near the window and told to stay there, which he did. He sat with his hands on his knees and watched the room fill with law enforcement the way people watch weather, without urgency or particular investment. An EMT came in and tried to take his blood pressure. He let her. Victoria watched all of this from across the room, while a detective with a notepad asked her questions she answered on half her attention. The next 2 hours were the particular chaos of aftermath. The kind that looks organized from the outside, all uniforms and yellow tape and purpose. but felt from the inside like being inside a machine without understanding its function. Hargrove appeared from the back office with the expression of a man who had survived something and hadn't fully decided how to feel about it. The wounded display case was photographed extensively. Rennick was taken out on a stretcher, handcuffed to the rail. Galloway went out in zip ties, still expressionless. Damian Cross had not been found. The back service exit opened onto an alley that connected to 3 different streets, and the responding units had been coming from the front. By the time anyone had the alley covered, there was nothing there but wet asphalt. Cole was released after an hour of questions. He gave his name, his company, his service ticket reference, and answered every question about what he'd done and in what order. He was accurate and unemotional about it, which seemed to create a slightly different category of problem for the interviewing detective, who kept asking follow-up questions as if the answers would eventually become less calm. You said you identified 3 shooters before engaging. Before moving. I didn't engage for approximately 4 minutes. And in those 4 minutes, you decided to... I identified the suppression actuator location, isolated the relay for the display lighting, and decided on a sequence. Cole looked at the detective. I needed the primary target to have the thing he came for before I moved. If he didn't have it, his focus was too broad. How did you know what he came for? I didn't know specifically. I knew he wasn't there for diamonds because he went straight to a specific case using a specific tool. That's not a smash and grab, that's a retrieval. The diamonds were cover for whatever he actually came for. The detective wrote something down. He was quiet for a moment, looking at his notepad. Mr. Donovan, is there anything in your background that's relevant to what happened here today? Cole looked at him steadily. I used to do a different kind of work. What kind? The kind where the government prefers you don't describe it in detail. The detective looked at him for a long moment. Then he wrote something else down and said he might need to follow up. And Cole said that was fine and gave him a number that was actually his current number, which he didn't always do. Outside on Fifth Avenue, standing in the thin October sunlight that had finally broken through the pewter sky, Cole checked his phone. He had a text from his daughter's school. She'd been marked present, no issues, reminder about the fall fundraiser Friday. He looked at it for a moment, then put the phone back in his pocket. He picked up his tool bag and started walking toward the van. Mr. Donovan. He turned. Victoria Sinclair was standing on the sidewalk in her charcoal blazer, which had a CO2 discharge stain across the left shoulder that was going to be somebody's dry cleaning problem. She was holding her phone in one hand and looking at him with an expression that he couldn't easily read. Not gratitude exactly, or not only gratitude, something more analytical. I want to ask you something, she said. Okay. Before you moved, you held up 2 fingers and pointed at the door. You were telling me something. I was telling you there were 2 I couldn't reach from where I was without help. I wanted to know if you'd been watching long enough to have a read on the one by the door. But you didn't know if I understood. No. And you moved anyway. I moved when I had the best available window, he said. I didn't need you to understand. It would have helped if you'd done something to draw attention from the one by the door, but when you didn't, I adjusted. She looked at him for a moment. I blinked. I know. That's when I adjusted. She was quiet. The street noise moved around them. Traffic, a siren 2 blocks north, the cart on the corner doing its morning trade. She seemed to be deciding something. You said Cross had the drive, she said. You knew his name. You knew it was a drive specifically. Encrypted data drive from the ring box in the 3rd case. He called the other one by name twice in the first 40 seconds. People in the middle of operations aren't careful about that. She was still looking at him with that expression. Who are you, actually? I told you. You told me you're a technician. I am. That's not all you told me. Cole shifted the tool bag on his shoulder. It's all that's relevant to why I was in the building. She took a step closer. Not aggressive, just closing the conversational distance the way people did when they were about to say something they didn't want spread across a sidewalk. My company, Sinclair Group. We have an acquisition presentation this morning that I'm going to be 4 hours late for, which is manageable. What's not manageable is that someone sent 3 men with weapons into a building I was in, and what they took wasn't jewelry. It was data. And if that data came from that store, in a ring box, hidden behind platinum bands, She stopped. That's not random. No, Cole said. It isn't. Arthur Voss, she said. You heard that name? He thought back. He'd been listening through the service door. No? Cross mentioned it? Not to me. He watched her face. Who is Arthur Voss? She was quiet for a moment in the way people were quiet when they were deciding how much to say to someone they'd known for approximately 2 hours, most of which had involved lying on the floor. He's on my board of directors, she said. He's been on it for 4 years. Cole looked at her. She looked back at him. The drive they took, he said. It came from inside your company. I don't know that yet. But you think it. She didn't answer, which was itself an answer. Cole considered the sidewalk for a moment. He thought about his van and his tool bag and the service ticket still clipped to his visor. He thought about his daughter's school fundraiser on Friday and the fact that he was supposed to pick up a casserole dish from his neighbor this afternoon. He thought about all the normal coordinates of his life, arranged exactly the way he'd arranged them, deliberately, patiently, over 3 years of being nobody particular in a city that was fine with that. Then he looked at Victoria Sinclair, who had not flinched during a hostage crisis and was now standing on a sidewalk with a CO2 stain on her jacket, doing math about a board member and a data drive. And he thought, she already knows more than she's saying. And what she knows is making her scared. And she's not the kind of person who scares easily. You have security, he said, at your company. A full team, yes. Do you trust them? She hesitated, a very small hesitation, but real. I trust most of them. That's not the same as yes. No, she said. It isn't. Cole set his tool bag down on the sidewalk. He was going to regret this, probably. That was fine. He'd regretted things before and still gotten up the next morning. Tell me about Voss, he said. So she told him. Not everything. She was too careful for everything. But enough. Arthur Voss had joined the Sinclair Group board 4 years ago as an independent director, bringing with him a network of institutional investors that had helped stabilize the company through a rough growth period. He was 60, well-regarded, the kind of man who appeared on lists and gave speeches at functions and was photographed shaking hands with people who mattered. He had been, for the first 2 years, exactly what he appeared to be. Then 18 months ago, Victoria had begun noticing small things. Decisions that leaked before they were announced. A competitor bidding on contracts with information they shouldn't have had. Documents requested in unusual volumes by Voss's office for purposes that were plausibly explained but felt, in the aggregate, wrong. She'd flagged it internally and been advised to be cautious, that Voss was a significant stakeholder, and she needed evidence. She had been building it, quietly, in collaboration with her CFO and one attorney she trusted. The evidence lived in documents, financial records, communications logs, a series of transaction patterns that didn't fit any legitimate strategic rationale. She'd been planning to present it to the full board, minus Voss, after the acquisition vote this morning. Except now someone had removed something from a jewelry store that belonged, apparently, to Arthur Voss. Whatever was on that drive, she said, he stored it there, physically, off-network, which means it was something he didn't want to exist anywhere it could be found. Insurance, Cole said. Or evidence of his own, she said. Something that points back to whoever he's working with. People like Voss don't operate without leverage. Cole was quiet. He understood the shape of this now, even if not the details. A man with access to the inside of a corporation, gathering data, building leverage, passing what he needed to whoever had hired him to compromise the company, and storing his own protection somewhere that couldn't be traced. And someone else, someone who knew about that protection and wanted it removed, had sent Cross to retrieve it. The robbery this morning, he said. Who else knew you were going to that store? My assistant. And she stopped. And Voss's office requested a copy of my daily calendar yesterday. Routine, he's board chair, he does it quarterly. She pressed her lips together. I didn't think about it until right now. He knew you'd be there? That doesn't mean he arranged it. No, Cole said. But it means someone who knew your schedule arranged it. And whoever hired Cross wanted that drive badly enough to do it in broad daylight in downtown Seattle with 3 men and automatic weapons. He paused. That's not a low-risk operation. That's someone who decided the risk was worth it. People decide that when they're out of time. Victoria was quiet for a moment. The cold October wind came down fifth and moved her hair slightly, and she didn't do anything about it. I have a board meeting this afternoon. Acquisition vote. Are you going? I can't not go. If Voss is what you think he is, and someone retrieved his insurance this morning, then he's vulnerable, she said, and scared. And when scared people are also powerful, they make different kinds of decisions than they usually would. She looked at Cole directly. I know, I understand the risk. He nodded slowly. She took a breath. Will you? She stopped, started again differently. I'm not going to ask you to do anything. You already did more than... She stopped again, and he could see her recalibrating, not out of indecision, but out of precision, trying to find the exact sentence rather than an approximate one. I have people for this. Security team, attorney, law enforcement contacts. I have what I need to handle it. Okay, Cole said. But I'd like to know your name, your full name. Cole Donovan. And your number. He gave it to her. She put it in her phone. Thank you, Cole, she said. Just that. Not for saving my life or for what you did in there. Just his name and thank you, which was somehow more personal than either of those things would have been. She put her phone in her pocket and turned and walked toward the parking structure half a block away, and he watched her go with the particular attention of someone who'd been trained to note the way people moved under stress. And what he noticed was that she moved the same as she had when she walked in that morning, like someone who knew where she was going and had already done the math about what it would take to get there. Cole picked up his tool bag. He walked to his van. He got in. He sat with the engine off for a moment, and then he took out his phone and did something he hadn't done in a while. He opened the contact list and scrolled to a name he kept near the top, not because he needed it often, but because there had been years when he needed it very quickly, and old habits were specific about that kind of thing. The name was Marcus Webb. The listing said insurance, don't call before 7 a.m. It was nearly 11 now. He didn't call yet. He started the engine instead and pulled out into Fifth Avenue traffic and drove 3 blocks before he pulled over again and sat. His daughter's school fundraiser was Friday. He was supposed to bring 24 cookies, which he'd been planning to make from scratch because she'd asked him to, and because he was, against all odds, a reasonably competent baker, a fact that exactly 0 people from his previous life would have predicted. He thought about Damien Cross, somewhere in this city, with a data drive belonging to a man named Arthur Voss. He thought about a board meeting this afternoon. He thought about Victoria Sinclair walking into a room where someone who'd been working against her for 18 months was going to sit across a table and vote on the future of her company. Cole leaned his head back against the headrest and looked at the roof of the van for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone and called Marcus Webb. It rang twice. Cole. The voice on the other end had the particular texture of someone who was never surprised by who was calling or had simply chosen to never sound it. It's been a while. Yeah, Cole said. I need to ask you something. Go ahead. Arthur Voss, Sinclair Group Board of Directors. What do you know about him? There was a pause. Not the pause of someone who didn't know, but the pause of someone deciding what knowing meant in a given context. Why are you asking? Because I was in a jewelry store this morning. Another pause. Then, with the careful neutrality of someone doing math, you're talking about the Hargrove situation. It's already on the wires. The man who ran the operation got out with a drive. Whatever's on it came from Voss, and Voss is on the board of a company where someone with more resources than 3 armed men has been working a long con. Cole. Marcus. You said you were done with this. I am done, Cole said. I'm asking a question. That's different. There was a longer pause. Voss has connections to a fund called Meridian Capital. Offshore, technically legitimate, practically a pass-through. There have been regulatory flags on the fund for 2 years that never went anywhere. That's all I can tell you on an open line. That's enough, Cole said. Is it? For now. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then, how's your daughter? She's good. She wants to be a marine biologist. That's a good job. Yeah, Cole said. It is. He ended the call and sat for another moment with the phone on his knee. Meridian Capital. He typed it into a note on his phone, just the name. He would look it up later. He would cross-reference it with what Victoria had told him. The transaction patterns, the competitor in Intel, the documents pulled by Voss's office. He would do this carefully, and he would do it quietly, and when he had something concrete, he would hand it to the people whose job it was to do something with concrete things. That was the correct order of operations. He knew this. He put the van in drive. The radio came on automatically. A talk station he kept meaning to change to music. The host was discussing something about city infrastructure, which did not hold his attention. He turned it off and drove through the wet Seattle streets in the specific silence of a man who had reopened a door he thought he'd closed, and was not yet sure whether that was going to be something he'd done because it was right, or because some part of him had been waiting, without fully admitting it, for a reason. Outside, the October sky had gone back to pewter. The rain was starting again, the fine kind that didn't bother committing, just hung in the air and let people walk through it and get slowly wet without being able to point to the precise moment it had begun. Marcus Webb called back 40 minutes later, while Cole was parked outside a coffee shop on Westlake, drinking something from a paper cup that was supposed to be a medium drip but tasted like it had been sitting on the burner since early morning. He drank it anyway. He was particular about some things and not others. "I pulled what I could," Marcus said. Meridian Capital has been moving money through a series of shell acquisitions for the past 3 years. 3 of the target companies were direct competitors to Sinclair Group in the Pacific Northwest regional market. 2 of them went under within 18 months of acquisition. One sold off its contracts to a holding company that traces back, 3 levels deep, to an entity connected to a man named Derek Halston. Cole set the coffee down. "Who's Halston?" "COO of Sinclair Group. Has been for 2 years." Cole was quiet for a moment. "So Voss is the outside pressure. Halston is the inside." "That's a theory," Marcus said carefully. "A well-supported one, based on what I'm looking at. But Cole, this is the kind of thing that needs to go to the SEC or FBI. This isn't a security problem anymore. This is a federal matter." "I know what it is." "Then you know you shouldn't be anywhere near it." "I'm not near it," Cole said. "I'm in a parking lot drinking bad coffee." "Cole?" "I hear you, Marcus. Do you?" "Yeah." He picked the coffee back up. "I'll be careful." Marcus made a sound that was not agreement and ended the call. Cole sat with the new information the way he sat with most things, letting it settle into the existing architecture rather than forcing it into a shape. Voss and Halston, outside and inside. The drive that Cross retrieved this morning was most likely Voss's own leverage against Halston, or against whoever was ultimately running the operation. The kind of insurance a smart man built when he was working with people who had both the motive and the means to eventually cut him loose. And whoever had sent Cross to retrieve it had decided that Voss's leverage was more dangerous than the risk of a broad daylight armed robbery in downtown Seattle. That was a significant calculation. It meant the endgame was close. Whatever they were planning, the acquisition vote Victoria had mentioned, the long game of bleeding the company from inside, it was timed. Something was going to happen today or very soon, and they needed Voss neutralized first. He looked at the time, 11:42. Victoria's board meeting would be mid-afternoon. He didn't have her number. She'd taken his, not the reverse. He thought about that for a moment, then decided it didn't matter. He knew where her company's headquarters was. Everyone in Seattle's business corridor knew the Sinclair Group Tower on 4th, 42 floors of glass and steel with the company name in understated brushed letters above the lobby entrance. He thought about Marcus's advice, which was correct. He thought about the FBI and the SEC and the correct order of operations, which he believed in genuinely and not just as a thing to say. Then he thought about Victoria walking into a board meeting this afternoon with a COO who'd been dismantling her company from the inside, and a board chair who'd stored his leverage in a jewelry store ring box. And one of those men was now leverage-free, and the other was about to vote on the future of her life's work. Cole finished the bad coffee. He started the van. He was not going to do anything reckless. He was going to go sit in a parking structure near the Sinclair Group Tower and be a man with a tool bag who was in the area. That was all. He would be nearby in case being nearby mattered. That was a reasonable and measured thing to do, and he was going to stop interrogating his own motives and just do it. He drove south on Westlake and turned toward 4th. The Sinclair Group Tower's lobby was the kind of space that communicated power through restraint, high ceilings, minimal furniture, a reception desk of pale wood staffed by 2 people who looked like they'd been selected partly for their ability to project calm authority. Security was visible but not aggressive. 2 guards near the elevator bank, a badge reader at the turnstiles, cameras in the corners that weren't hidden but weren't prominent either. Cole didn't go inside. He found the parking structure across the street and took a spot on the 3rd level where he had a sight line to the lobby entrance and the side service entrance on the alley. He rolled the window down an inch and sat. At 12:20, a black SUV pulled up to the main entrance and 2 men got out. Not Voss, not Halston. Security, from the look of them. They went inside. The SUV stayed. At 12:35, his phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't have saved. "This is Victoria Sinclair. I'm on my way in. Halston called an emergency pre-meeting. Is there any chance you're still in the area?" He typed back. 3rd level, parking structure across the street. What did Halston say the pre-meeting was about? Her response took 90 seconds. He said it was about adjusting the acquisition presentation format. He's been trying to table the vote for 3 weeks on procedural grounds. This feels different. Cole typed, "Different how?" He doesn't usually call things at the last minute. He's methodical. This is reactive. Cole thought about that. Reactive meant something had changed for Halston. The most likely thing that had changed was the robbery. News of the Hargrove situation had been on the wires since mid-morning, Marcus had said. If Halston knew about the robbery, he knew the drive was in play. If he knew Cross had retrieved it, he might know that Voss's leverage was now in someone else's hands, which meant the comfortable equilibrium between Halston and Voss, each holding something over the other, had just collapsed. He typed, "Don't go into the pre-meeting alone. Bring whoever on your team you trust most. That's my CFO, Elena Park. She's already on her way in. Good. Don't let Halston separate you from her." A pause. Then, "You think it's escalated beyond corporate?" He didn't answer that immediately because the honest answer was, "I don't know, and I'm not going to tell you I do." What he knew was that people who'd ordered a daylight armed robbery to retrieve a leverage piece were people who'd made a decision about acceptable risk that most people never made. The robbery had failed. Partially. Cross had the drive, but 2 of his men were in custody, and the story was public, and law enforcement was already connected to Voss's name through the drive's recovery location. If Halston was smart, he was cutting losses and trying to execute whatever plan he had before the legal walls closed in. Smart and scared was the most dangerous combination Cole knew. He typed, "Just don't be alone with him, that's all." He put the phone on the dash and watched the lobby entrance. At 12:58, a town car pulled up. Arthur Voss got out. He was exactly what Victoria had described. 60, silver-haired, the composure of a man accustomed to his own weight in a room. He moved toward the entrance without looking around, which was either confidence or obliviousness, and Cole couldn't tell from this distance which. At 1:07, a second car. Derek Halston was 54, shorter than Cole had imagined from the name, with the slightly forward posture of a man who worked hard at appearing taller than he was. He walked in behind Voss without acknowledging the man, which was a choice that communicated something, though Cole wasn't sure what exactly. Cole watched the lobby for another few minutes. The 2 security men who'd arrived in the SUV were still inside. He clocked them again through the glass, positioned near the elevator bank, neither of them looking like standard building security. Their clothes were right, but their attention pattern was wrong. Building security watched the door. These 2 were watching the elevator. He picked up his phone. He called Marcus. "Halston's security details in the lobby," he said when Marcus picked up. 2 men. They're watching the elevator, not the entrance. A beat. "That's internal, not building security." "No." "Cole, if you're looking at this from a parking structure, I'm observing." "Observing," Marcus repeated flatly. "Do you have the detective's card from this morning?" "Somewhere." "Call him. Tell him what you're seeing. Let him make the call." "I'll do that." "Now, Cole, Not after something happens. Yeah, Cole said. Now. He found the detective's card in his jacket pocket. Sergeant Ray Okafor, Seattle PD, Major Crimes. He called. It went to voicemail. He left a message that was specific and brief. Halston's name, the Meridian Capital connection Marcus had given him, the two men in the lobby who weren't building security, and the time. He said he was a civilian with no actionable authority and was calling because the pattern warranted attention. He hung up and looked at the lobby again. The two men were gone. He sat up straighter. He scanned the lobby. One of the reception staff was on the phone. The turnstiles were clear. The elevator bank was empty. He checked the time. 1:14. He got out of the van. Him. He didn't have a plan that he would have defended under direct questioning. What he had was the functional equivalent, a set of contingencies arranged in order of probability. The most likely thing was that nothing would happen. Victoria was inside with her CFO, building security was present, and Halston was a corporate actor whose tools were procedural rather than physical. The next most likely thing was a confrontation of some kind that would be ugly but not dangerous. And below that, in this category of things he was not going to pretend were impossible just because he preferred them to be. The possibility that Halston had decided that the cleanest solution to a closing window was a different kind of clean. He went through the lobby entrance with his tool bag over his shoulder and his jacket zipped. The reception staff looked up. Elevator maintenance, Cole said. Got a call this morning about a door sensor on the executive floor. I know it's been a busy morning. I apologize for the timing. The woman at the desk looked at him. She looked at the tool bag. She looked at the two officers in the corner. Actual building security. A man and a woman, uniformed. She said, I need to call up and confirm. Of course, Cole said. While she called, Cole scanned the lobby. No sign of Halston's two men. He did a quiet count of the exits. Main entrance, service corridor left, stairwell door right, fire exit at the far end past the reception desk. 4 cameras, 2 active looking, 2 that he suspected were on a slow rotation. The elevator bank had 3 cars, all currently on upper floors. The receptionist said something into the phone. She listened. She said, I have a technician here about the elevator sensor. Another pause. Yes, sir. She put the phone down. Mr. Halston's assistant says someone did call in a service request yesterday. Go ahead. Cole nodded. He walked to the elevator bank. He pressed the button for 38, 2 floors below the executive level, which Sinclair Group occupied on 40. He wanted to come at it from the stairs rather than arriving directly on the floor in an elevator that anyone waiting there would hear opening. The elevator was empty. He rode it up in silence, watching the floor numbers. At 38, he got out, found the stairwell, and went up 2 floors on foot. The stairwell was the standard institutional variety. Concrete, metal railing, fluorescent tubes, the faint smell of a building that had been breathing recycled air for decades. Nobody in it. He came out on 40 into a corridor that was considerably different from the lobby. Dark wood paneling, carpet with actual thickness to it. The kind of overhead lighting that had been chosen by someone who understood that illumination and glare were different things. The executive floor of Sinclair Group was exactly what it looked like it would be, which was not always the case with things. He could hear voices. Not raised, not yet, but the specific tension of voices that were working to maintain a register that nobody in the room fully believed. He moved along the corridor toward the main conference room, which was visible through interior glass. A long table, 8 or 9 people, the kind of group that was technically having a meeting and actually having a confrontation with parliamentary structure stretched over it like a tarp. He could see Victoria at one end of the table and Elena Park beside her, a compact Korean-American woman in her 40s with the expression of someone who had come prepared. Voss was at the other end, and Halston was seated mid-table on the opposite side from Victoria, and Cole couldn't read his expression clearly through the glass. He also couldn't see Halston's 2 men. He kept moving along the corridor, past the conference room, checking the offices. Most were empty. Middle of a board meeting, people either in the room or not on the floor. At the end of the corridor, a door was open 3 inches that should probably have been closed, and he could see through the gap that one of the men from the lobby was standing inside, facing a second door that led to a small antechamber off the main conference room. The antechamber had a second door into the conference room itself. It was the kind of architectural redundancy that executive floors built in for catering and private entry, and that nobody thought about as a tactical consideration except people who'd spent years thinking about exactly that. Cole stood in the corridor and looked at the door that was open 3 inches. The man inside had his back to him. He was wearing a jacket that was slightly too heavy for the heated interior, for the same reason that Cole's own jacket was sometimes slightly too heavy. Cole thought about Sergeant Okafor's voicemail. He thought about the FBI and the SEC and the correct order of operations. Then he opened the door. The man turned faster than Cole had expected, which updated his assessment of who he was dealing with. Not hired muscle in the crude sense, but someone with training, and the half-second of surprise that cost him was exactly what Cole needed. Cole moved inside the room and closed the door behind him in the same motion, and he put the heel of his palm into the man's chin before the man's hand had cleared his jacket. It wasn't elegant. Nothing physical ever was, regardless of what movies suggested. The man's head snapped back and he hit the wall, and Cole caught the weapon before it reached the floor. A compact semi-automatic, suppressor threaded, which updated Cole's assessment a second time and significantly. Suppressed weapons in an executive anteroom were not the tools of corporate muscle. They were the tools of people who intended to use them in a building where the sound would create problems. The man slid down the wall and sat, not unconscious. His eyes were open, but not capable of organized action for the next 30 to 60 seconds. Cole removed the magazine, cleared the chamber, and put both in his jacket pocket. He set the weapon on a cabinet shelf where it was accessible if he needed it, and not if he didn't. He zipped his jacket. He took 3 seconds to think about what a suppressed weapon in this location meant in terms of what was planned, and then he went through the antechamber door and into the conference room. Every head at the table turned. The room was exactly as he'd seen through the glass. 8 people, the long table, the tension underneath the professional surface. Victoria looked at him with an expression he couldn't immediately parse. Halston looked at him with an expression Cole could parse perfectly. Recognition. Not of Cole specifically, but of the category of complication Cole represented. "Who is this?" Voss said. "Elevator maintenance," Cole said. He set his tool bag down inside the door. "I'm sorry to interrupt. There's a situation in the anteroom that requires immediate attention from someone with building authority." "This is a closed board meeting," Halston said. His voice was measured. "You need to leave." "The man in the anteroom has a suppressed firearm," Cole said. "I've secured the weapon and the man is temporarily incapacitated. I'd recommend calling building security and Seattle PD immediately." The room went very still. Halston's face did something complicated. He started to stand. "Don't," Cole said. Just the word, conversational volume, no particular emphasis. Halston sat back down. Victoria was already on her phone. "Elena, call building security now. Tell them we need units on 40 immediately." She looked at Cole across the table. "There's another one." "I know, I don't have his position." "He was in the corridor when I came in," said a man to Victoria's right. Heavy-set, 50s, the one board member whose face showed something other than shock, which was grim recognition. "Where in the corridor?" Cole said. "Near the elevator bank." Cole looked at the conference room door. The elevator bank was 30 feet from where he was standing and currently out of his sight line. He looked at Victoria. "Don't let Halston leave the room." He went back through the anteroom, stepped over the first man who was attempting to sit up straighter against the wall, and came out into the corridor. The second man was 14 feet away, moving toward the conference room door, and he saw Cole at the same moment Cole saw him. He had his weapon in his hand, already drawn, not aimed yet, which was a half-second of operational delay that was the difference between 2 very different outcomes. Cole moved laterally rather than toward him, which was counterintuitive and therefore effective for exactly the length of time it needed to be, which was the time it took to cover the distance. He took the weapon arm at the wrist and the elbow simultaneously and applied a rotation that the arm joint was not designed to accommodate, and the weapon came free. And the man went to his knees, making a sound that was not a word. Cole was breathing harder than he would have liked. He was 35, not 25, and 35 felt different in the aftermath of things. His left knee, which had been wrong since a night in a country he didn't talk about, was reporting its opinion of the past 30 seconds in terms that were not ambiguous. He stood up. He cleared the second weapon. Building security arrived from the stairwell 40 seconds later. Two uniformed guards who came through the door fast and stopped when they saw Cole standing in the corridor with his hands visible and two men on the floor. "Private security working for Derek Halston," Cole said. "Armed with suppressed firearms. Both weapons are cleared and in my jacket pocket. I'm Cole Donovan. I called Sergeant Okafor at Major Crimes about an hour ago. I'm going to take my hands out of my pockets slowly and give you the weapons and the magazines, and then I'd appreciate it if you'd call Okafor directly because this situation is going to require someone with federal connections." The guards looked at each other. The older one said, "Don't move." "I'm not moving," Cole said. The next 40 minutes were controlled chaos in the way that only institutional spaces could manage. The kind where everyone was doing something, and the something had a form and a process and a logic, but the underlying reality was that nobody was entirely certain what had just happened or what came next. Seattle PD arrived in force. Building security sealed the floor. The board meeting dissolved into something that was technically not a board meeting anymore, but had all the same people in it, now in various states of managed distress, in the large conference room with a PD sergeant asking questions. Okafor arrived at 2:07. He was tall, late 40s, with the economical manner of a man who'd learned that most situations resolved faster when you wasted fewer words on them. He found Cole in the corridor and looked at him for a moment. "You left me a voicemail," he said. "I did. And then you came inside. I observed two armed men in positions that suggested the threat had moved from financial to physical. So you observed them into unconsciousness. I secured a situation that was developing faster than law enforcement response time." Okafor looked at him. He had the expression of a man who wanted to be frustrated and was finding it difficult because the logic was technically sound. "Your military record came up when we ran your name this morning," he said, "after the Hargrove situation. I figured it might. Special operations, 14 years, 3 deployments I can see. The rest is classified," Cole said. "Yes, classified," Okafor repeated. He looked at the corridor floor where the scuff marks from the second confrontation were still visible. "Are you injured?" "My knee is unhappy. It'll recover." Are you going to tell me you were just in the area?" Cole considered. "I was genuinely concerned about Ms. Sinclair's safety, based on information I developed this morning regarding the connection between the Hargrove robbery and internal corporate actors at this company. I communicated that concern to you via voicemail before coming inside. When the situation on the ground indicated an imminent physical threat, I acted within the scope of what I assessed was necessary to prevent harm." Okafor nodded slowly. He wrote something in his notebook. "That's a very organized answer. It's an accurate one." "I'm sure it is." He put the notebook away. "I'm going to need you to stay available. We're going to have a lot of questions about this morning and this afternoon." "I know." The two men, professional, Cole said. Trained. I'd recommend running their prints against DoD contractor databases. The weapons are suppressed mil-spec, not commercial. Okafor looked at him with a slightly different quality of attention now. "Okay," he said, "we'll do that." He walked back toward the conference room. Cole leaned against the wall and put some weight off his left knee, which thanked him moderately. He looked at the corridor ceiling. Standard drop tile, fluorescent panels, a sprinkler head every 12 feet. Normal. He was standing in a normal building in a normal city on a normal Tuesday afternoon, and he had just disabled 2 armed men in an executive corridor, and his knee hurt, and he was going to be answering questions for the foreseeable future. He thought about the cookies he was supposed to make Friday. He tried to remember if he had enough vanilla extract. The conference room door opened, and Victoria came out. She walked toward him without hurrying, and she stopped a few feet away and looked at him with the same expression she'd had when he'd first come through the anteroom door. Not the expression of someone who was surprised, exactly. More the expression of someone who had suspected something and was in the process of adjusting to being right. "You got my text and came here," she said. "I was in the area." "You were in the parking structure across the street." "Which is in the area." She looked at him. He could see something working behind her eyes. Something she was organizing into a form that she could use. "Halston is in there with Okafor. Voss left before the police arrived. They stopped him in the lobby." A small pause. "His own security team. He hired men to come into my building and... She stopped. She pressed the words down. If you hadn't been here. I was here, Cole said. So, that's not a complete thought. It doesn't need to be. You're okay. Your CFO is okay. The situation is contained. He shifted his weight off his knee again. The federal angle, the Meridian Capital connection, the financial fraud, that's going to take time, but Okafor will connect it. He seems competent. He is. She folded her arms. Not a defensive gesture, the gesture of someone who was cold, though the corridor was not cold. Cole? Yeah. Why did you come? She said it directly, without ornamentation. You didn't have to. You'd already done. You had no obligation. Cole thought about how to answer that, and decided that the honest answer was also the simplest one. Because you walked into something this morning that wasn't finished, he said. And I could see it wasn't finished, and I had the ability to do something about it. That's all. She looked at him for a long moment. Most people, she said, would have made the call and gone home. I made the call, he said. I was already in the parking structure. Something in her expression changed. Not softened exactly, but shifted towards something more open, the way faces shifted when people stopped managing them. She was tired. He could see it now under the composure, the particular exhaustion of a person who had been in a controlled state of emergency since 9 o'clock in the morning and was only now beginning to feel the weight of that. Is there someone picking up your daughter today? She asked. He blinked. He hadn't expected that. My neighbor, he said. She knows I work irregular hours sometimes. Victoria nodded. Good. A pause. She's lucky. I don't know about that. I do, she said simply. I had a father who was never where it mattered. You're clearly not that. He didn't have a response to that, or rather he had several, and none of them felt right to say. He looked at the wall. His knee was still complaining. The fluorescent light above him had a faint flicker that it probably had every day, and nobody had gotten around to reporting. Elena is going to handle the board for the rest of today, Victoria said, returning to business the way she returned to everything, without transition, without apology. The acquisition vote is postponed pending the investigation. Legally, it's the right call. Personally, she made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. I've been building toward that vote for 8 months. It'll happen, Cole said. You don't know that. No, he said. But you didn't get this far by losing things you'd built for 8 months. She looked at him again with that expression, measuring, not suspicious, the expression of someone recalibrating an estimate. Go home, she said. Be with your daughter. I'll deal with what's here. He picked up his tool bag from where he'd set it inside the anteroom door. Victoria, he said. She turned. Halston is going to lawyer up immediately. Whatever financial documentation you have, the transaction patterns, the communication logs, the CFO's records, get copies to Okafor tonight. Don't wait for process. Process takes time, and some of what you have might be argued as time-sensitive. She nodded. I know. I know you know, he said. I'm saying it anyway. He walked to the elevator. He pressed the down button and waited, and while he waited, he could feel her still in the corridor behind him, not leaving. He didn't turn around. The elevator arrived, and he got in. The doors closed, and he was alone in it, and the numbered floors counted down, and somewhere on the way from 40 to the lobby, his knee stopped complaining quite as loudly. Or maybe he just stopped paying attention to it. In the lobby, he walked past the reception desk, through the turnstiles, through the main entrance, out into the October afternoon. The rain had stopped again. The light had that particular flat quality of fall in Seattle, the kind that made everything look like it was being seen through frosted glass. He crossed the street to the parking structure. He got in the van. He sat. His phone buzzed, a text from his daughter's school group chat, a reminder about the Friday fundraiser cookie contribution, which 3 other parents had already confirmed, an emoji reacted to. He looked at it for a moment. He typed, confirmed. Chocolate chip, 2 dozen. He added a thumbs up, which felt like the right register. He put the van in reverse and started backing out of the spot, and his mind was already moving forward, not to whatever was coming next in the legal proceedings, not to the fallout of today, but to the specific and ordinary question of whether he had enough vanilla extract and whether he should stop at the store on the way to pick up his daughter, or if he could check the cabinet when he got home and run out later if he needed to. It was a small question. The smallness of it was, in its own way, the point. He did have enough vanilla extract, just barely. The bottle was down to its last quarter inch, the kind of amount that made you uncertain whether to count it or replace it. He decided to count it. He'd make it work. His daughter's name was Nora. She was 9, and she had her mother's dark eyes and his stubbornness, which was either going to serve her extremely well or cause significant problems depending on the decade, and he'd made peace with not knowing which. She came through the front door at 4:15 with his neighbor Ruth behind her, both of them talking about something that had apparently happened at recess involving a misunderstanding about whose turn it was on the swings, and the injustice of it was still fresh enough that Nora's hands were moving when she explained it. Cole listened to the whole account before saying anything, which was the correct approach. Ruth gave him a look over Nora's head that meant she's fine. It was just a day, and he nodded his thanks, and she went back next door. Later, after dinner, pasta, nothing complicated, he was too tired for complicated, Nora asked him why his jacket smelled like a fire extinguisher. "Work thing," he said. "Did something catch fire?" "No, it was preventative." She considered this. "That's kind of a boring story." "Most of the good ones are," he said, which she accepted with the equanimity of a 9-year-old who had already learned that adults were frequently unsatisfying on the subject of their own days. He got her to bed at 8:30, which took until 9:15 because of the book they were in the middle of, and he didn't rush it. He sat on the edge of her bed and read 3 chapters in a row, doing the different voices, and when she finally went to sleep, he stayed for a moment in the dark room, just listening to her breathe with the particular quality of attention that he'd never been able to name, except to say that it felt like the opposite of every high-alert state he'd ever been in. The same focus, turned entirely towards something that required nothing from him except to be present. He went downstairs. He sat at the kitchen table with his phone and a glass of water. He had 4 missed calls, 2 from numbers he didn't recognize, 1 from Okafor, 1 from Marcus. There were also 2 text messages from Victoria Sinclair, sent 30 minutes apart. The first said, "Elena and I delivered the documentation to Okafor tonight, as you suggested. He's been in contact with FBI financial crimes. Halston's attorney is already filing motions, but Okafor thinks the timeline on the Meridian transactions is solid." The second said, "Voss is cooperating. He's apparently been trying to find a way out for 8 months. His attorney approached the prosecutor this evening." Cole read both messages. He typed back, "Good. Get some sleep." Her response came immediately, which meant she hadn't been sleeping. "I'll sleep when this is finished." He typed, "It won't be finished for months. The legal process takes what it takes." "Sleep anyway." A longer pause. Then, "You sound like someone who's had to learn that the hard way." He looked at that for a moment. He typed, "Yeah," and left it there. He called Okafor. The sergeant picked up on the second ring, which meant he also wasn't sleeping. "Donovan, I was going to call you tomorrow. I saw your missed call. I wanted to update you and also to tell you that the 2 men from the tower, their prints came back against a DoD contractor database, as you suggested." A pause. "Private security firm out of Virginia called Crestline Group. They've done work in federal adjacent spaces that I can't access details on, but the short version is that Halston hired people who were significantly more serious than corporate bodyguards." "I noticed," Cole said. "The suppressed weapons are going to be a separate federal charge. That's ATF's lane, not mine, but it helps the overall picture." Another pause. "The drive that Cross retrieved from Hargroves, we found Cross." Cole sat up slightly. "Where?" "Port of Seattle. He was trying to move a shipment out. Long story. The drive is in evidence." Okafor's voice shifted tone slightly. Not much, but Cole caught it. Whatever is on it, the FBI financial crimes team went very quiet when they looked at it. And quiet in that context usually means significant. Voss's leverage material. That would be my read. Evidence of the full structure of what Halston and his principals were building. Names, accounts, transaction records going back 4 years. Okafor paused again. "It's going to be a wide net, Donovan. wider than Sinclair Group. Some of the names on the preliminary list that I'm not supposed to know about yet are significant. Cole understood what that meant without needing it spelled out. He'd been in enough situations where the thread you pulled turned out to be attached to something much larger than the knot you'd originally found. The nausea that came with that discovery never fully went away. You just got better at not showing it. "Okay," he said, "I need you available for a full debrief. Tomorrow if possible, or the day after." "I can do tomorrow afternoon. I have a work commitment in the morning." 2 o'clock? "Yeah." "One more thing," Okafor said, and his tone went careful in the specific way of someone about to say something they weren't sure how it would land. "Your military file. The classified sections, I can't see them, obviously, but the sections I can see are... It's an unusual record, Donovan. What you did today, both at Hargrove's and at the tower. Those aren't the actions of someone who just took a security systems job and forgot his past." Cole was quiet. "I'm not asking you to explain anything," Okafor said. I want you to know that whatever the full picture is, what you did today prevented what would have been a very bad outcome in that building. I don't think it would have stopped at Halston and Voss. I think those two men in the executive corridor were there for a reason that went beyond intimidation." A short pause. "So, thank you. I don't say that as a formality." "I know," Cole said. "Thank you for the update." He hung up. He sat at the kitchen table for a while longer. The house was quiet. The good kind of quiet, the kind that had texture to it, the particular sound of a space where someone was sleeping safely. He could hear the refrigerator and the occasional car on the street outside and nothing else. He thought about the 4 years of Voss's work, the 18 months of Halston, the careful, patient dismantling of a company that a woman had built and that dozens of people worked inside, unaware that the structure around them was being hollowed out by people who sat at the same table and used the same language and shook the same hands. The patience of it was what stayed with him, the willingness to maintain a performance across years. He'd known people who could do that, had worked alongside some of them, had in certain contexts been required to do a version of it himself. It never stopped being strange. The distance between who a person appeared to be and who they actually were could be enormous, and most people never knew to look for it. He thought about Nora sleeping upstairs, who was constitutionally incapable of maintaining a deception longer than about 45 minutes before the weight of it showed on her face. He thought that was a good quality. He hoped she kept it. He went to bed at 11:30 and slept better than he expected. The next 2 weeks moved the way consequential things moved when institutions were involved. Faster than you wanted in some ways, slower than you wanted in others, and mostly out of your hands. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit formally opened its investigation on the 3rd day, which meant the scope expanded past Seattle PD's jurisdiction, and Okafor became a liaison rather than the primary. Cole gave his debrief at 2 o'clock as scheduled, and then gave a second one to a federal agent named Ree, who was thorough and pleasant and asked the same questions 3 different ways, which Cole recognized as the correct technique and submitted to without complaint. Halston's attorney filed 4 separate motions in the first week, all of which were denied. Voss's cooperation agreement was reportedly extensive. He had, as Cole had theorized, been building his own protection for years, and the drive Cross had retrieved from Hargrove's turned out to contain not just leverage against Halston, but a comprehensive record of the entire Meridian capital structure, including the identities of 3 other executives at 2 different companies who'd been participating in the scheme. The net, as Okafor had said, was wide. Cross himself was facing federal charges on the robbery and additionally on weapons trafficking, since the investigation into his operation had turned up a secondary business that was considerably more serious than corporate retrieval work. Rennick and Galloway, who had both accepted plea discussions, were providing information about Cross's network in exchange for reduced exposure. Cole followed the public filings with the mild interest of someone monitoring something they'd set in motion and no longer controlled. He did his work. He serviced alarm systems, updated firmware, replaced sensor arrays in commercial buildings across the city. He made the cookies for the school fundraiser on Friday, chocolate chip, 2 dozen, using the last of the vanilla extract, and then immediately adding it to the grocery list because running out was the kind of thing that happened if you let it. Nora's class raised enough for the new playground equipment they'd been short on, and she texted him about it from school, just the facts and a single exclamation point, which was very much her style. He heard from Victoria on the 9th day. Not a text this time, a phone call, in the mid-morning while he was in the parking lot of a commercial building in Sodo waiting for his 11 o'clock appointment. "Are you busy?" she said. "In 20 minutes I will be." "Then I'll be brief." She wasn't brief, but she was organized, which served the same purpose. She told him that the Sinclair Group Board had formally suspended Halston pending the federal investigation, that the acquisition vote was rescheduled for the following week with a restructured board that had replaced Voss's seat with an independent compliance director, and that the company's legal team was preparing a civil suit against Meridian Capital that would, in their estimation, recover a significant portion of the damages caused by the scheme. "The company is okay," she said. "Or it will be. It's going to be a difficult quarter, and the press is—" She paused. "The press is what the press is, but the structure is sound." "Good," Cole said. "I also wanted to tell you that I've spoken with the FBI about your role in both incidents. I was clear that your actions were protective and that without your presence, the outcomes at Hargroves and at the tower would have been materially worse." A pause. "I didn't know if anyone was telling you that officially." "Oh, Okafor has been good about it," Cole said. "I'm glad." She was quiet for a moment. "I want to offer you something, and I want you to hear it before you respond." He waited. Sinclair Group is restructuring its security operations as part of the board's governance reforms. We're creating a new position, director level, overseeing the entire physical and digital security infrastructure. It's a significant role. It pays accordingly. Another pause. "You'd be exceptional at it." Cole looked at the Sodu parking lot. A pigeon was doing something purposeful near a loading dock. The morning was cold but clear, one of those Seattle fall days that occasionally produced actual sunlight without apologizing for the effort. "Victoria," he said. "I know," she said. "You're going to say no." "I'm going to say no." "Tell me why. Not because I'm going to argue with you. I want to understand it." He considered. "I built something," he said. "The life I have now. It took a while to get it to where it is. It's not impressive from the outside, I know that. But it fits, and it functions, and my daughter knows what my schedule looks like on any given day, which wasn't always true. If I take a director role at a company that's going to be under federal scrutiny and press attention for the next year, that changes things. The shape of my days changes, and I've spent a long time getting the shape right." Silence on the line. Not uncomfortable silence, thoughtful. "That's a more complete answer than I expected," she said. "You asked for a reason, not a deflection." "Yes." A pause. "I respect it. I do." He heard something shift in her voice. Not sentiment exactly, but something adjacent to it. "You know, I've met a lot of people who said they'd built the life they wanted. Most of them were describing what they'd accumulated. You're describing something different." He didn't say anything. "I'm not going to withdraw the offer," she said. "It's open if you change your mind. I won't bring it up again, but I want you to know it exists." A short pause. "Is there anything you need from the company, from me personally? Anything the events of the past 2 weeks have cost you that I can address?" "My tool bag took some damage," he said. "One of Halston's men knocked it over and the voltage meter cracked." A beat of silence. "I'll send you a new one." "I was joking." "I know. I'm not." He could hear the trace of something in her voice that wasn't quite humor, but shared its neighborhood. "Cole. Seriously, thank you. I've said it before, but I want to say it clearly, without the emergency around it. You made a choice that day at Hargroves to act when you could have stayed behind a door, and then you made another choice to come to the tower when you could have gone home. Those were choices. I don't take them for granted." He looked at the parking lot. The pigeon had concluded whatever it was doing and left. "You would have handled it," he said. "Maybe. Probably not in time." A pause. "Let me know if you change your mind about the position." "I won't," he said, "but I will." She laughed at that. A real one, brief and unguarded, and then the call ended. He sat with the phone in his lap for a moment. His 11 o'clock appointment was a commercial gym on the south end of the building. New sensor installation, straightforward job. He picked up his tool bag and got out of the van. 3 days after that call, on a Thursday morning, he got a text from an unknown number that read, "Mr. Donovan, this is Special Agent Patricia Ree, FBI. We need to speak about a development in the Halston matter. Would you be available this afternoon?" He was available. He met Ree at a coffee shop on Capitol Hill, her choice, which he noted was not a federal building, which meant either convenience or the deliberate informality of a conversation she didn't want on record in the standard way. She was 40, Korean-American, with the composed efficiency of someone who had learned to get to the point because her time was a finite resource she'd stopped wasting. She ordered a black coffee and got to the point. "Derek Halston," she said, "has begun providing cooperation in exchange for a reduced charge framework. His attorney and the prosecutor are in early discussions." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. In the course of his initial proffer, he disclosed information about a secondary layer of the operation that we weren't fully aware of. Cole waited. The Meridian Capital scheme was, as you know, designed to weaken Sinclair Group's market position and facilitate a hostile acquisition by a holding company connected to Halston's principals. What we didn't know, and what Halston has now disclosed, is that the acquisition wasn't the end goal. The acquisition was a mechanism. The actual goal was access to Sinclair Group's federal contract portfolio. Cole set his coffee down. "What contracts?" "Sinclair Group has subsidiaries that hold contracts with 3 federal agencies for data infrastructure and secure communications systems. Mid-tier contracts, not the highest classification level, but significant access points." Ree looked at him steadily. The people behind Meridian Capital are not primarily financial actors. They used financial mechanisms, but the motivation was intelligence access. Cole absorbed this. "Foreign principals?" "We believe so. We're not in a position to confirm that publicly yet." She took a drink of her coffee. "I'm telling you this because you're part of the evidentiary chain and because you have a background that makes you capable of contextualizing what I'm saying without needing it over-explained." She paused. "And because there's an aspect of the development that directly involves you." He looked at her. "Halston has provided a communication log that includes references to you by name," she said. "Specifically, references from the day of the Hargrove robbery through the evening of the tower incident. Someone was feeding Halston information about your involvement in real time." Cole was quiet for a moment. "Someone at Seattle PD." "We don't know yet. It could be a leak at PD. It could be someone monitoring communications through other means. It could be someone in Voss's circle who had eyes on the situation. We're investigating." She looked at him. "The communications indicate that after the tower incident, Halston's principals considered you a significant enough loose end to warrant attention. They were going to come after me. The language in the communications is oblique, but yes, that's our read." She paused. "The cooperation discussions have effectively frozen that consideration, because Halston needed his principals to believe he was still managing the situation while he was actually talking to us. But I want you to be aware that your profile is higher in certain circles than you'd probably like." Cole thought about this. He thought about Nora's school, which was 4 blocks from his house. He thought about Ruth next door. He thought about the shape of his days and how long he'd spent getting it right. "What do you need from me?" he said. "Nothing urgent," Ree said. "We have monitoring in place, and Halston's cooperation has disrupted the operational chain. But I wanted you to know because you should be making informed decisions about your own situation." A pause. "If there are things you want to discuss with someone about protective measures, Okafor has resources, and we can also facilitate certain things at the federal level if the situation warrants." "I'll talk to Okafor," Cole said. "Good." She stood, picked up her coffee. "One more thing. The people behind Meridian Capital, Halston's principals. When we eventually make those names public, you're going to recognize some of them, or at least the kind of people they are." She looked at him. "You've encountered this category before, in a professional context." He looked back at her. "Yeah," he said. "I have." She nodded once, as if that confirmed something she'd already believed. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Donovan." She left. He sat with his coffee for another 10 minutes, doing nothing in particular, just sitting with the new information the way he'd been doing all week with various pieces of it. The thing about information was that it changed the shape of things you thought you already understood. He'd thought the Sinclair Group situation was essentially resolved, arrests made, evidence secured, the legal machinery engaged in running. And it was resolved in those terms. But it was also a window into something that went considerably deeper, and the thing about windows was that they worked in both directions. He paid for the coffee and walked out into the afternoon. He called Okafor from the sidewalk. "Ree told me," Okafor said when he picked up. "I was going to call you today. What's your assessment?" "I think the immediate risk is low given Halston's cooperation status. I think the medium-term risk is something we should be thoughtful about." A pause. "How do you want to handle it?" "What are the options?" "We can do standard residential monitoring, a patrol pattern adjustment, not obvious. We can escalate to a formal protective status if you want, but that's more visible and you'd probably prefer it wasn't." A pause. "Or you can proceed normally with awareness, which, given your background, is probably a more meaningful option than it would be for most people I'd have this conversation with." "The third one," Cole said. "I figured." Okafor paused. "You should tell someone, not the details, but someone should know to pay attention if things feel off." Cole thought about who that person would be. It wasn't Marcus, who was in D.C. and had his own situation. It wasn't Ruth next door, who was 67 and didn't need this weight. It wasn't anyone from his prior life, which he'd left in a different context entirely. He thought about who he'd actually talked to this week, about anything that mattered. He called Victoria after he hung up with Okafor. She picked up on the third ring, slightly breathless, the sound of someone interrupted mid-motion. "Cole?" she said. "Are you somewhere you can talk for a few minutes?" A beat. "Yes." Her voice settled. "What happened?" He told her. Not everything. Not the foreign principals angle, which was federal and not his to share. But the surveillance of his involvement, the communications about him in Halston's logs, the consideration that had apparently been floated and then suspended. He told her because Okafor was right that someone should know, and also because she had a right to understand that the situation she was in had involved more than the visible shape of it, and because he trusted her with it in the specific way that you trusted people you'd watched function under pressure. She was quiet through most of it. When he finished, she said, "They were tracking you from day one. From Hargrove's, at least. Because you were a variable they hadn't planned for." "Yeah." Another pause. Are Nora and you safe right now?" He noticed the order she put it in. "We're fine. Okafor is adjusting patrol patterns. The main risk vector has been disrupted by Halston's cooperation." "But you're telling me because someone should know the fuller picture." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. He could hear her breathing, controlled, thinking. "What do you need?" she said. "Nothing specific. I wanted you to have the information." He paused. "And I wanted to ask if your company's new security structure, the one in the governance reforms, if it includes a digital monitoring capability. Not for me. For identifying if anyone starts moving money or communications in patterns that look like the Meridian structure." "Elena is building it," she said immediately. "She's already flagged it as a priority. We're bringing in an external firm to set up the framework. Make sure they include federal adjacent monitoring protocols, not just commercial threat vectors." "I'll tell her." A pause. "Cole." "Yeah." "You called me." "I did." "You said you wanted someone to have the full picture. You have a contact at Seattle PD and a contact at the FBI, and presumably other contacts I don't know about." A pause. "You called me." He looked at the Capitol Hill sidewalk. A woman walked past with a stroller, talking on her phone, half attending to both. A man on a bicycle navigated the parked cars with the practiced patience of someone who'd done this street 1,000 times. "You're in it," he said. "You've been in it from the beginning. It seemed right to keep you current." "That's the practical answer," she said. "Yeah," he said. "It is." She let that sit without pressing it. He appreciated that. "Is there anything specific I should be watching for on my end?" she said. "The board restructuring. Go carefully with whoever replaces Voss's seat. Have Ree's team run background on any candidate before the vote. Not as an insult to anyone, just as process." "Already planned," she said. Elena insisted. "Good." A pause. "I'll let you know if anything changes on this end." "Do that," she said. And then, after a brief pause, How are the cookies? He blinked. What? You mentioned last week Nora's school fundraiser was Friday. Chocolate chip, 2 dozen. How did they go over? He was quiet for a moment. He hadn't expected her to remember that. He wasn't sure why he was surprised. She was clearly the kind of person who retained things, but he was. They went fast, he said. She texted me about it. Good, Victoria said simply. The word landed without weight, without performance. Just good, like it mattered, which it did. He said goodbye and pocketed the phone. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment longer, in the cold October afternoon, with the particular feeling of a man who has set something in motion and watched it travel further than he intended and is now standing still while it continues, which was both unsettling and, in a way he couldn't fully explain, right. He walked back to his van. He had a 2 o'clock appointment in Fremont, commercial building, routine inspection, firmware update on an alarm panel that probably hadn't been touched in 18 months. Ordinary work. The kind that didn't draw attention and didn't change the shape of anyone's day except the building manager who'd get a green status report and file it and forget it. He drove north through the city, and the afternoon light came through the windshield at the low October angle that made everything look older and more considered than it was. And he turned the radio on and found something with actual music this time, and he thought about nothing in particular for 20 minutes, which was, all things considered, exactly what he needed. The indictments came down on a Wednesday morning in late November, 6 weeks after the day Cole had walked into Hargrove and Associates with a service ticket and a tool bag, and no particular expectation that the morning would be anything other than ordinary. He heard about it the same way most people heard about things. His phone buzzing on the kitchen counter while he was making Nora's lunch. A news alert from a local station whose app he'd never gotten around to deleting. He picked it up, read the headline, set it back down, and finished making the sandwich. Turkey, no mustard, the crust cut off because she was 9 and still hadn't come around on crusts, which was a preference he'd stopped arguing with. The headline said, Federal indictments unsealed in Sinclair Group conspiracy, 7 charged including former COO, board chair, and offshore fund principals. 7. He'd known about Halston and Voss. The others were names he recognized from the Meridian Capital thread Marcus had pulled. 2 fund managers, a corporate attorney who drafted the shell company structures, and 2 individuals whose names the article described carefully as connected to foreign financial interests, which was the kind of phrasing that meant something specific to people who knew what it meant. He texted Okafor. Saw the news. Okafor responded within a minute. All 7. The foreign principals are a separate sealed matter. That one's going to take longer. But the domestic chain is solid. DA is confident. A pause, and then, You did good, Donovan. From the beginning. Cole put his phone in his pocket and called Nora down for breakfast. She came down the stairs in the specific manner of a 9-year-old who was awake but had not yet committed to being awake. One hand trailing the wall, hair not yet dealt with. Wearing a sweatshirt that was technically his, but had been absorbed into her wardrobe 6 months ago without negotiation. She sat down at the table and looked at the sandwich he'd put in her lunchbox. You cut the crust, she said. I always cut the crust. I know. She said it with the satisfaction of someone confirming that the world was operating correctly. She ate her cereal without looking up, and Cole drank his coffee standing at the counter the way he always did because he'd never gotten into the habit of sitting for breakfast and probably wasn't going to at this point. Dad? She said. Yeah. At school yesterday, Mrs. Ferraro was talking about people who help other people, like regular people who do something important. What? She stirred her cereal. She said they're usually not famous. He looked at her. That sounds right. She said most of the time when something bad happens, it's someone nobody expected who figures out what to do. She ate a spoonful. Is that true? He thought about it honestly, the way she deserved. Sometimes, he said. Not always. But sometimes the person who knows what to do is just the person who happens to be there and pays attention. She considered this. Were you ever like that? He looked at his coffee cup. Once or twice. She nodded, processing this, and returned to her cereal. She didn't ask for details, which was either incuriosity or a kind of wisdom he hadn't taught her and didn't know where she'd gotten. Either way, he was grateful for it. He drove her to school. He watched her go through the front doors with the particular motion of a kid who knew exactly where she was going, backpack slightly too large for her frame, hair now dealt with but imperfectly, which was fine. He sat in the drop-off line for a moment after she'd gone inside, the way he did most mornings, for no concrete reason except that he wasn't ready to leave yet. Then he drove to work. Victoria called him that afternoon. He was in the parking lot of a commercial property in Belltown, having finished a sensor calibration 20 minutes early, and he was eating a granola bar that he'd found in his jacket pocket and was probably 3 weeks past its best quality, and he was reading a service ticket for his next job. And when her name came up on his phone, it surprised him in the specific way that familiar things sometimes did when you hadn't been expecting them. "I saw the indictments," he said when he picked up. "7 counts," she said. "The attorney says the domestic case is airtight. The foreign principals are going to take longer. Different jurisdiction, different process. But they're named and they're known now. You can't operate in the dark once you're named." "No," he said. "You can't. The civil suit is moving forward simultaneously. We expect it to go to settlement. Meridian's attorneys have already been making overtures." A pause. "The company is going to be okay, Cole. Really okay. Not just holding together. The restructured board approved the acquisition vote 2 weeks ago. It passed." "I know. I saw that. Elena is running a security overhaul that would make most banks nervous. She's good at it." He could hear something lighter in Victoria's voice than had been there through the past 6 weeks. Not happiness exactly, but the particular quality of a person who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has finally been able to set it down in a place where it won't slide. "I wanted to call and tell you, not through a text. I wanted to actually say it. I appreciate that." The board is also moving forward with the initiative I mentioned in October. Support programs for frontline workers, security personnel, technicians, facilities workers, people whose work makes everything else possible and who tend to be invisible until something goes wrong. A pause. "It was inspired by you. I want you to know that. Not symbolically. I sat in a board meeting and made the specific argument that the most important person in a crisis is often the person nobody looks at when they walk through the door, and I made that argument because of a Tuesday morning in October when a man came in to update firmware and changed what happened to everyone in that building." Cole ate the last of the granola bar. Tasted like cardboard with ambitions. "Victoria, I'm not trying to embarrass you. I know. He thought about how to say it. "Don't make it larger than it was. I saw a situation, and I had the training and the position to do something about it. That's all. The people those programs are going to help, they show up every day to jobs that don't require them to do anything exceptional, and they do those jobs well and consistently and without recognition for years. That's worth honoring. What I did was one morning." She was quiet for a moment. "You know what I've noticed about people who do exceptional things?" she said. "They always describe it as smaller than it was. And people who do ordinary things always describe them as larger." A pause. "I'm not sure that's a coincidence." He didn't say anything. "The offer is still open," she said. "The director position. I meant it when I said I wouldn't bring it up again, and I lied, apparently." "I noticed. Will you at least think about it?" "No," he said. "But I think you already knew that." She laughed. That same brief, unguarded sound he'd heard on the phone weeks ago. "I did," she said. "I asked anyway." "Why?" A pause. "Because I wanted to hear you say no again. It's one of the more uncomplicated things I've heard lately." He could hear her smile in it, which was a strange thing to be able to hear, but he could. "Some people say no because they're afraid. You say no because you're clear about what you want. Those sound like the same thing from the outside, but they're completely different." Cole looked through the windshield at the Belltown parking lot. A woman was loading groceries into a sedan 2 spaces over. A delivery truck was double parked at the corner, and the driver was arguing mildly with someone on a phone. The city doing its ordinary business. "How are you?" he said. Not how is the company, not how is the case. Just the question. She took a moment with it, which meant she was going to answer honestly rather than reflexively. "Tired," she said. "More than I expected. I thought when the indictments came I'd feel resolved. But I mostly feel tired. 6 weeks of operating at a level I couldn't let drop. And now the thing I was holding has been handed to prosecutors and attorneys, and I'm supposed to go back to running a company. A pause. Which I will. I'm good at it. I just didn't expect the tired.
That's
what happens when adrenaline has nowhere left to go, Cole said. Your system ran at high capacity for a sustained period. When the acute threat resolves, it doesn't know what to do with itself for a while. Is that from experience? Yeah. How did you handle it? He thought about the months after his last deployment, about coming home to a daughter who was 4 years old and a life that needed to be built from the available materials, and about the specific disorientation of safety after sustained danger. Not relief, not gratitude, but a bewildering absence of whatever had been organizing your entire system around survival. About learning to be bored again, and how much harder that was than anything that had come before. Badly at first, he said, and then better. And then the shape of the ordinary days started to feel like something worth having, rather than something you were waiting to end. A pause. It takes a while. That's not a bad thing. It just takes what it takes. She was quiet for a moment. You're better at this kind of conversation than I expected. What kind? The honest kind, where someone actually answers the question. It's not that hard. It's surprisingly hard, she said. Most people give you the version of the answer that requires the least follow-up. A pause. Get some rest, Cole. You deserve it too. I'm fine. I know you are. Get some rest anyway. He smiled at the windshield, which was a thing he did sometimes when no one was watching. Take care of yourself, Victoria. I will. A pause. Thank you, again, still. I'm not going to stop saying it, so you might as well accept it. Okay, he said. The call ended. He sat in the parking lot for another minute, the granola bar wrapper on the passenger seat, the service ticket for his next job on the dash. The delivery driver had concluded his phone argument and was now moving boxes with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd resolved the issue and moved on, which was its own kind of expertise. Cole started the van and drove to his next job. In February, on a morning when the Seattle rain had finally graduated from the fine, ambiguous kind to an actual committed downpour, Cole parked his van on Fifth Avenue and carried his tool bag into Hargrove and Associates for the first time since October. Gerald Hargrove had called him 2 weeks ago. Annual maintenance, same as always, the panel firmware and the sensor array. Same service ticket, same building, same pale-lit display cases and brass fixtures. The store had been repaired quickly, the ceiling patched, the cases replaced. You wouldn't know from the inside what had happened there unless you knew what to look for, which most people didn't. Cole knew what to look for. He noticed the new ceiling material in the section where 2 rounds had gone in. He noticed the third display case from the left had slightly different hardware than the others. Newer hinges, different lock. He noticed that the motion sensor in the upper right corner had been repositioned, probably by a less experienced technician, and was going to have a blind spot if nobody corrected it today. He would correct it today. Gerald Hargrove came out of the back office before Cole had made it 5 steps through the door. The store had 3 staff on the floor this morning, more than October. Denise, whom Cole recognized, and 2 others he didn't. They all looked up when he came in. Mr. Donovan, Hargrove said. He extended his hand and shook it with both of his, which was not what he usually did. We're glad to have you back. Cole was mildly surprised. He didn't show it. Good to be back. I noticed the sensor on the upper right was repositioned. I'll check the coverage arc when I'm done with the panel. Of course. Hargrove was still looking at him with the expression of a man who had something to say and was trying to find the form for it. What happened here in October? I never properly... You don't need to, Cole said. I want to. Cole looked at him. Hargrove was 63 and had been running this store for 22 years and had spent a significant portion of one Tuesday morning hiding behind a filing cabinet, which was not a thing that left a person unchanged. He had the look of someone who had spent weeks deciding how to say something and had earned the right to say it. Okay, Cole said. What you did here. I've thought about it every day since. I was in that office and I was terrified, and you were completely calm. And I couldn't understand that at the time. But I've thought about it, and I think I understand it now. Hargrove paused. You weren't calm because you weren't scared. You were calm because you decided what you were going to do. Those are different things. Cole looked at the older man for a moment. Yeah, he said. They are. I just wanted you to know that I know that. Hargrove nodded once and stepped back toward his office. The panel's all yours. Coffee machine is fixed, if you want any. I'm okay, Cole said. But thank you. He went to work. The panel was in the same condition it always was. Functional but neglected in the way of things that worked well enough that nobody thought about them. He updated the firmware, checked the relay connections, ran a diagnostic on the sensor array. When he got to the upper right sensor, he realigned the housing by 11 degrees and ran the coverage test until the arc closed the blind spot completely. It took longer than the firmware update. He did it anyway. He was in the back office finishing his paperwork when his phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. They got the foreign principals. Sealed indictment opened this morning. Recalled me directly. It's done. He read it twice. He thought about the shape of what that meant. Not the legal mechanics, which he understood well enough, but the human dimension of it. 4 years of a scheme that had reached into federal contracts and foreign intelligence interests, and the daily working lives of hundreds of people who'd had no idea what was happening around them. 4 years of small decisions by men who decided that other people's work, other people's stability, other people's livelihoods were acceptable collateral for their own advantage. And now those men were named and charged, and the machinery of consequence was engaged, moving at its own pace toward its own form of resolution. He typed back, "Good." And then, after a moment, "How do you feel?" Her response took a minute, like it's actually over, which is different from knowing it's over. A pause, and then, "Also hungry. I forgot to eat breakfast." He almost smiled. "Go eat something." "I will." "Cole." He waited. "I'm glad it was you, in that store. Of all the people who could have been there that morning, I'm glad it was you." He looked at the text for a moment. He thought about what to write back and decided that most of what he could say would be less than what she'd said, so he wrote, "Me too," and left it there. He finished his paperwork. He packed his tools. He came out through the main floor and stopped at the panel near the door to run one final check. Indicator lights, relay status, communication test to the monitoring station. Everything green. The system was current, compliant, fully functional. It would run quietly in the background of this store's ordinary days, doing its work without drawing attention, protecting things while nobody thought about it. He said goodbye to Denise and to Gerald Hargrove, who shook his hand again, and he walked out into the February rain. Fifth Avenue was wet and gray, and the coffee cart on the corner was doing its morning trade with the patient consistency of something that showed up every day, regardless of weather. People moved along the sidewalk with their umbrellas and their collars up and their somewhere-to-be energy, the city in its ordinary mode, doing what cities did, carrying millions of separate lives forward through the same streets without any of them fully knowing what was happening in the ones next to theirs. Cole stood on the sidewalk for a moment with his tool bag and let the rain do what it wanted to his jacket, which was already past the point of caring. He thought about what Nora's teacher had said, that the person who figures out what to do is usually someone nobody expected. He thought about Hargrove's version of the same idea, not calm because he wasn't scared, but calm because he'd decided. He thought about what Victoria had said about the difference between people who said no out of fear and people who said no out of clarity, and he thought that the same distinction probably applied to most of the important choices. The difference between living a certain way because you couldn't imagine otherwise and living a certain way because you'd looked at the alternatives and decided. He had looked. A long time ago, in the aftermath of things he didn't talk about, he had looked at what his life could be and what he wanted it to be, and the two had not been the same, and he had made a choice. It wasn't a dramatic choice. It wasn't the kind that got recognized. He'd simply stopped doing one thing and started doing another, and built up around himself and his daughter a life made of ordinary materials, work schedules and school lunches and cookies for fundraisers, and a neighbor named Ruth who kept a spare key and a sensor in the upper right corner of a jewelry store that he just realigned by 11 degrees. There was no version of that choice that looked like heroism from the outside. He understood that. He'd understood it when he made it, which was part of why he'd been able to make it. The thing nobody told you about quiet lives was that they required as much decision as any other kind. Maybe more, because the world was always offering you something louder. He walked to his van. He had a service ticket for a commercial property in Fremont, routine inspection, panel firmware. After that, a school pickup at 3:15, and Nora had asked if they could try making homemade pizza for dinner, which he'd agreed to, and which was going to require a grocery stop because he definitely didn't have yeast. He drove north through the rain. Behind him, on Fifth Avenue, the Hargrove and Associates sign glowed steady and unchanged above the entrance. Inside, the display cases caught their light. The sensors swept their arcs. The alarm panel ran its quiet diagnostics, maintaining its connection to the monitoring station, ready for whatever it was asked to do. Nobody looked at it. Nobody needed to. That was the whole point. There is a particular kind of person who moves through the world without asking to be seen, not out of weakness, not out of shame, but because they have long ago made their peace with the difference between being known and being valuable. They show up. They do the work. When something terrible arrives, they meet it with whatever they have, and then they go home and make dinner and listen to their kids talk about the unfairness of recess, and they do not mistake the absence of recognition for the absence of meaning. Cole Donovan was that kind of person. He'd been that person before anyone gave him a reason to be, and he'd remain it long after the last court date was concluded and the last news cycle moved on to something else, and the Tuesday in October when 3 men with weapons walked into a jewelry store became the kind of thing that lived in old case files and people's private memories and nowhere else. He didn't need it to live anywhere else. The van moved through the gray February morning, past the coffee carts and the commuters, and the city doing its perpetual work of carrying people forward, and Cole Donovan drove to his next job, the same as he had every morning before this one, and every morning that would come after.